to Prince Farc book launch. I am Matteo. I'm going to be, the voice that will take you through this journey. We're going to be here until 5 p.m. I also happen to be Prince's husband. What's going to happen today is really impressive. So we're going to have we're going to start first and foremost with a keynote speech by the author herself. And then we're going to talk about 3 different subjects taken from her book. So we'll have Corinne explain them, and then we will have some, her vision, her thoughts will be complemented each time by a different panelist. So we have very relevant and insightful panelists today, and I will introduce them one by one as we go along. Once we finish this session, then we will have Lee Heinrich, who is the publisher and the senior editor and publisher of Prince's book, also with a piece about inclusion. And we'll finish with a Q&A, so you can ask questions throughout the event in the chat box, and we'll pick a few at the end, and we'll read them, and I will direct them to the author and some of the panelists as well. Last but not least, we will also pick one lucky winner. So what you win, we win an autographed book by Print, and we will announce it at the end. So stay with us until the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my wife and the author of the book, Perrine, for her keynote speech. Thank you, Perrine.
Thank you, Matteo, and welcome everyone. So let me set the scene for you. I'm in a beautiful resort in wine country, Napa Valley, California, and it's March 2019. I just flew from London to California for my company's annual kickoff event, and I feel so excited to be here. I'm so excited to celebrate my company's success with all my colleagues from all around the world. I feel so pumped up to be here. And as I sit down in my hotel room to check my calendar and check where I'm supposed to be next, I find out by accident that I have not been invited to the Women in Business lunch by my own boss. And all my excitement disappears. I feel like a door has been slammed on my face. I feel excluded. I feel rejected. I feel like I don't belong. Once again, my own boss has excluded me from a team event. And for the last 12 months, she's been passing me over for a promotion. And that exclusion from that team event made me feel even more disconnected and even more disengaged from my boss than ever before. But feeling excluded at work is not something that happened just to me. It happened to many of us. And it happens in particular to women and other minorities. It happens a lot to people who can't see people who look like them clearly succeeding in their field. For every 100 men that are hired and promoted to manager level position, only 72 women experience the same thing. And women are often hired and promoted based on past achievements, whereas men are often hired and promoted based on future potential. I can certainly remember how many times I was told that I was not ready yet for that promotion when my male counterparts were told they had great potential for a promotion. And research continues. The reason for this disparity is not that women don't negotiate. In fact, women negotiate even more often than men for promotions and pay rises. The hard truth is that when women negotiate, people like them less for it. So I've identified 3 ways that you can invite everyone to your table so that they can bring everything to the table. Let me introduce you to the ACT acronym. A, articulate your why and set goals. C, change your mindset. And T, take real action. I talk about the ACT acronym in my new book, Inclusion, to help you become a more inclusive leader in your own organization. And today, by joining me at my book launch event, you're already acting as a more inclusive leader. So I'd like to thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Perrine. Thank you for your insights. we can all relate, I guess, to a story like this, and you often talk about inclusion to the point that you also titled your book Inclusion. And so this takes me to the first topic from the book, so inclusion and belonging. And one thing I would like to ask Maryon to do, just to start on this subject, is how the definition about these two concepts, inclusion and belonging. Over to you.
Thank you, Matteo. So in fact, the whole book is called Inclusion, as you know, and I have an entire chapter dedicated to inclusion and belonging. So to answer your question, Matteo, I'd like to read an extract from the first chapter of the book, which is called Inclusion and Belonging. What is inclusion? So inclusion is the feeling of being heard, seen, and valued for who we are. Someone feels included when they feel that they are being seen, heard, valued, respected, and invited by someone or by a group of people. Inclusion is a feeling, not an action. Although there can be acts of inclusion, such as inviting someone to a dinner, inviting someone to a meeting, or asking someone what they think about a situation, inclusion comes from a feeling inside of a person, a feeling of being welcomed and valued. In fact, it is possible for someone to receive acts of inclusion, such as the ones just mentioned, yet not feel included. Inclusion is an emotion felt by someone when they feel they are being seen, heard, and appreciated for who they are. What is belonging? Belonging is feeling part of a group of people that recognizes us as one of theirs. Belonging is even stronger because it goes beyond feeling included. It is when being part of a group becomes integral to our identity. Belonging means that no matter what, the group will always call us and involve us. Being connected with the group touches each individual's identity. Inclusion and belonging often go together, but as noted, it is possible to feel included without having the feeling of belonging. It is possible, especially in the workplace, that an individual might feel like they are included in the sense of feeling seen, heard, valued, and respected, yet they might not necessarily feel like they belong to that group of colleagues. They might not feel like that group is part of their identity. On the other hand, when someone feels both included and like they belong to a group at work, this is the ultimate win-win situation for the employee and for the organization. In that case, the individual feels a deep sense of community with the organization, and they feel like being part of the organization is actually part of their identity. Conversely, it is not possible to feel like they belong without feeling included. For someone to feel like they belong to a group, they must first also feel included, meaning they must feel seen, heard, valued, and respected.
Thank you, Maryon, for this great definition of inclusion. And I would like now to invite our first guest, which is Cheryl. So Cheryl Cole, she is the editor of DiversityQ. She's also, an equality, inclusion expert and speaker. And to you, Cheryl, what I would like to say is, so probably the same question I asked Maryon before. So what is your definition of inclusion and what it means to you personally?
Yeah, so thank you, Maryon and Matteo, for inviting me along to this wonderful celebration of the new book. And when it comes to inclusion, I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to talk to you about it from the workplace perspective. So to explain inclusion, I also want to have a look at the definition of diversity. And to understand what inclusion means in terms of diversity, for me, it's an indicator of being human in the workplace. It's the practice or the quality of including and involving people from a range of ethnicities and genders, backgrounds, experiences, sexual orientations, visible or hidden disabilities, and so on. So for me, when it comes to inclusion, it's about leveraging those differences in the workplace. It's about practicing or facilitating the sense, as Maryon said, of belonging through providing fair and sometimes, not always, but equal access to opportunities and resources for those diverse groups who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. It's also about maximizing the contribution and potential of those people as well.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. I mean, very, very important insights. I think what we can do now is maybe move to the second subject. So the second subject is about pitfalls around inclusion. So as usual, we start with prints extra from our book, and then we're gonna expand on the subject with one of our guests.
Thank you, Matteo, and thank you so much, Cheryl, for your definition. I think you're absolutely right when you talked about including different genders and also sexual orientation. I think there is a whole spectrum, so thank you for that, Cheryl. And yes, there are a lot of pitfalls to avoid when it comes to rolling out a successful inclusion and diversity program. In fact, there are so many that I've titled one of my chapters, Common Inclusion Pitfalls to Avoid, and it's chapter 9, but there are too many to talk about all of them on this event, so I'll just pick one right now, because this pitfall is one of the most common I have seen when I've helped organizations with their inclusion programs. And I'm talking, of course, about not getting leadership commitment. I think all of us are very familiar with not getting full commitment from the senior leadership team. And so again, I'd like to read an extract from chapter 9, called Common Inclusion Pitfalls to Avoid. And this is point 2, and it's called Failing to Get Leadership Commitment. So not getting the CEO's personal commitment on diversity and inclusion is probably the most common and deadly mistake of any inclusion program. Senior leadership support is one of the first requirements in creating a shared vision for a systemic change. Positive and lasting behavioral change is the primary requirement for a cultural change approach. Change agents must determine how new behaviors will become a strategic advantage for the business of the organization. These change agents are the senior leadership team members themselves because of their authority and influence within the organization. Diversity and inclusion have been perceived as separate concern for too many years by members of the leadership team. The reality is that it takes the top leadership team of an organization to bridge the gap between good intentions and action. It is the vision and the personal commitment of the top leadership team that allows employees to be part of a behavioral process of culture change within the workforce, and then makes them responsible for creating a long-lasting culture of inclusion.
Thank you, Perrine. Thank you very much. So we follow the same structure. So we now will invite one of our other guests. In this case, is Maryon Stewart. So Marion is the author of Manage Your Menopause Naturally, and also 27 other books. And she is a world-renowned healthcare expert, and she's helped dozens of women all around the world, basically, deal with PMS and menopause naturally, which means without hormones or drugs. And she's also, in 2018, she's received the British Empire Medal, and she's been shortlisted by the Daily Mail as one of the top 50 most influential women. So, Marion, the question I ask you is, obviously the myth is older men seem to have perceived as being more, like having more to offer than older women. I mean, is that true or not?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me. It's very exciting to be part of this book launch. You could be forgiven for thinking that could be true when you look at the situation that's going on, but actually I'm here to tell you it's not true at all, because women have amazing wisdom when they get to this phase in their lives. It's just that they're in need of what I call a midlife refuel, and probably they don't know that. Mostly their doctors don't know that. We know from a Mayo Clinic survey that only 7% of doctors and gynecologists feel adequately educated to help women going through menopause. And so menopause and perimenopause, which are the 8 years leading up to menopause, are not a joke. There's something that happened to half the population. It's the fastest growing sector in the workplace. And Forbes said in 2019 that it's costing $810 billion globally each year due to lost productivity and associated healthcare costs relating to menopause. So that's absolutely massive. And it's going on under the radar, and most companies don't understand what's going on in the workplace. We've been going into companies and doing anonymous surveys. So we're looking at symptom scores and we're looking at lost productivity to report back to them, because the symptoms can be so embarrassing, anything from hot flushes to night sweats, which are common, and really take a woman out of a meeting. She can't focus, maybe she gets forgetful. Some women think they've got early dementia. They have severe brain fog and can't remember what they were saying mid-sentence. And other people feel very tired because they can't sleep at night, they're being woken up in the night, they feel achy and old. And many of them, in fact, our latest survey on 1,100 women showed that 96% of women said that they were not prepared for menopause, and 2/3 of them felt robbed of life as they knew it. And in a workplace survey on 1,000 women, we found that 84% of them felt that their productivity was adversely affected for more than a week a month. And most of them are, certainly more than half of them, are not up for talking to their boss about it. And they're not even, surprisingly, and I was surprised about this too, they're not even up for talking to their colleagues about it. It's embarrassing. They feel a bit like the pods in the London Eye. And although we're starting to talk about it now in the workplace, particularly in the UK, it's more a question of raising awareness about menopause and giving women more flexible working hours and maybe a desk fan and an M badge rather than a solution. And so what I've been focusing on in the last 28 years is helping women to manage their menopause naturally, so that there is a solution. They can overcome their symptoms and they can get back to feeling really well again. And I think that that's the key thing, because at that point, when they have what I call a midlife refuel, they become turbocharged, a bit like a racing car going into the pit during a Formula One race and being tweaked, coming back on track in the fast lane and getting to win the race. So they can be the best versions of themselves, both in and out of the workplace, and that has to be a win-win situation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marion. Thank you for raising awareness. But it's well, not just raising awareness, but you provided some of the part of the solution to it.
Yeah,
so.
And also I think, just to say, I mean, if I can maybe cite an example of, because we see these wonderful transformations, and it is a life stage, it's not a condition. And we see women, so I can think of a professor who was on my program called Jo Brewis, and I met her at a menopause conference a couple of years ago. And she was one of the co-authors of the Government in the Workplace report on menopause. And she was on the verge of leaving the workplace because she thought she had early Alzheimer's, and she couldn't remember anything, not even her colleagues' names. And she was scared. She had lots of other symptoms as well, including depression and fatigue. And I invited her to come on our program. And within the space of a few weeks, well, actually probably 6 weeks, she was so much better. And within a few months, her symptoms had gone completely, to the point where instead of leaving the workplace, she was actually promoted and became head of department. And so what you're seeing is that women who've been working all their lives and competing with men in the workforce successfully are falling over at the time of the menopause because no one's really helping them. But it doesn't need to be like that. And I just feel that if companies step up and invest a little in their female workforce at this phase in their lives, maybe take away the taboo, because there is a lot of taboo about menopause, and just make it okay for everyone to have a midlife refuel in their 40s, and maybe even men eventually, but certainly start with women, so that they feel entitled to that and they can get back to feeling really well and productive. And it will be great for their relationships and their self-esteem as well as the workplace.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marion. Great. So I think we're doing great. Why don't we move to the third subject from the book now? The subject is Change Starts With You. So the virtual mic goes to Marion.
Thank you, Matteo. And thank you so much, Marion. I'm so glad to have you here today, because I think your insight into supporting women with menopause in the workplace is absolutely spot on in the context of inclusion. And supporting women going through menopause are absolutely one of the group that need extra support. And so I'm so glad that you're here and you're sharing your wisdom with us today. So thank you for that. And I think it's a nice segue into answering your question, Matteo, about Change Starts With You. So again, this is one of the chapters of my book, and it's, to be specific, chapter 17, and it's called Change Starts With You. And it's the whole idea of, with diversity and inclusion, we can't really expect someone else to do the work for us. We can't expect HR to do the work. We can't expect our leadership team to do the work. We can't expect our manager to do the work. We need to do the work, whether we are in a senior position or not, whether we are heading a department or not. I think it's important that change starts with you. So I'm just going to read a short extract of my book. Again, it's chapter 17 and it's called Change Starts With You. Today, leaders around the world will do something remarkable. A regional VP of a software company will finally speak to that disruptive team member who tells jokes that makes everyone feel uncomfortable and give him a final warning. A CEO of a public company will fire her head of sales, who has been known for bullying her team members and for being rude and disrespectful to her colleagues. A marketing director will finally speak up about the abusive relationship her boss has been creating and give a final warning to her management that she will no longer tolerate bullying at work. Initially, each of these people will feel scared and worried, but they are going to do it anyway because they know this cannot continue. These leaders know that they might not be popular and they might risk their jobs, but they also know that this is the right thing to do, and so they will do it. These leaders know what it takes to be an inclusive leader, and they are ready and willing to be the change. Most people spend the majority of their waking hours in a job. So working in an environment that is inclusive, respectful, and safe is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Leaders have a fantastic position in the organization to be the change. And when they know what the right thing to do is, they do it. Becoming an inclusive leader is a choice. So as you've heard, the main idea here is that change starts with each and one of us. And being an inclusive leader doesn't mean we have to be a CEO of a company. We could be an individual contributor, but doing the right thing, even though it's scary and even though it's uncomfortable, is the right thing to do. So there you go. That's my answer to your question, Matthew, about change starts with you.
Fantastic. Thank you. I would like to bring in now Carl Honoré. So Carl Honoré, for those of you who don't know him yet, he's a two-time TED speaker. He's also a best-selling author and is a voice of the slow movement. Hi, welcome, Carl.
Hi, thank you very much.
Hi, Carl, so change starts with you. So a lot of it has to do with mindset. What is the best mindset that employees and companies in general can have?
Mm-hmm. Well, before I jump into answering the question, I want to say thank you very much for having me as part of the launch. Perrine is a genuine champion of inclusion, and it's a thrill and an honor to be here. And I noticed that she pulled a particular surprising inclusion move there by putting her name on my Zoom box. So I feel even more included than I was expecting to today. So we're off and running. The question is, what sort of mindset should we have in the workplace and so on? Well, you probably won't be surprised to hear from me that the mindset I recommend is a slow mindset, slow with a capital S, which does not mean doing everything slowly. That would be preposterous. I'm not an extremist or a fundamentalist of slowness. I love speed. Faster is often better. We all know that, but not always. And that's really the key to this slow mindset. It's about doing things at the right speed. You know, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes you're in hare mode. Sometimes you're in tortoise mode. It's about shifting gears. You know, you're on, you're off. Sometimes you lean in, sometimes you lean back. Musicians talk about the tempo giusto, right? The correct tempo for each piece of music. And I think that's what this gets at. It's about giving staff at every level the freedom and the space to work and move and operate at the right tempo for them. And when your company has embraced that slow ethos, the company and everyone in it becomes more accurate, more productive, and more creative. But it's very important to remember that we don't all have the same tempo, right? We're all born different. Everyone has their own internal metronome. So what's fast for me might, Matteo, be very slow for you, and Marion, something that's kind of just right for you. Perrine might find it really, really, faster than she's ever come across before. So the key really is allowing people to work at their own tempos and identifying those different tempos. You realize in the workplace, we've all seen this, that some people just are happier being fast. It works for them. They're the people who react quickly. They have popping off ideas all the time. And then other people are more in the kind of tortoise mode. They want to take time to step back, to process and metabolize what they've heard, to look at the big picture and then come up with their view. And any company that bets the whole farm on the fast people is heading for trouble. What you need to do is include all the people, all the different ranges of tempos, the fast, the slow, and everything in between, because by blending teams with that tempo, bringing that wide, slow mindset to the game, that really for any company is a superpower.
Okay, thank you. And obviously team are made of more junior and senior members. And what's, you know, do we have all the same tempo, or are there differences between different ages or different, you know, different?
Well, again, everyone is different and we all age differently, but as a general rule, there is a kind of slowing as we age. I mean, certainly physically, I mean, I'm someone who plays a lot of sports. My reflexes are still fast, but I can't run or skate as fast as I could in my 20s, and neither can any professional athlete. We slow down a bit physically. And we also, in some ways, can lose a bit of cognitive zip, right? But there's a silver lining here, right? And the silver lining has a big slow word written on it. Because what do we gain with that slight deceleration that can occur as we get older? Well, older workers tend to be more accurate. They make fewer mistakes. They're better at seeing the big picture and connecting the dots. So maybe the younger cohort might be more inclined and maybe better at moving fast and breaking things, right? That phrase of the moment. But older staff are more inclined to do something which is equally useful, which is perhaps to move more slowly and to question how we want to break things or whether we want to break them at all in the first place, right? So again, it's the idea of bringing the different tempos together, the different speeds, the different stages of life, old, young, and everything in between. Older workers also tend, I mean, our social skills tend to improve. We get better at listening. And you often find that older workers are better equipped and more inclined to help their colleagues. So you find that if you place an older worker or older workers in a team, that everybody's productivity goes up, not just the productivity of the older person. So there's a big payoff to be had by embracing inclusion in the workplace in terms of people's tempo and remembering that age can affect tempo as well. So embracing all ages, every stage of life.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. I'm really happy today. I'm learning a lot. Thanks everyone for your contribution. So we're going now to the final one, the one from Lee Heinrich. Lee is works for she's a principal and senior editor in Right Way Publishing, and the publishing house that published Perrin's book. So Lee, obviously your point of view is from where, you know, the industry where you operate. So what I would like to ask you as a question is what diversity should look like in the book publishing industry?
Well, first, I would like to say how delighted I am to see this launch as a fruition of Perrin's work. She has just done an excellent job in creating this new book and sharing this knowledge. And it's been a pleasure working with her. To answer your question, I'd like to take a high-level look at diversity in the publishing industry, because I think this is where it starts. There are 3 tiers that we need to think about here. The first tier is the work. Writers creating from different vantages and viewpoints, materials to share out with the world. Well, I don't think we have any problem with that. That is plentiful. It's there for the reaching, if you will. But that leads us to the second part, and that's actually the publishing part. And here is another point that we really need to see greater diversity, particularly in decision makers within the publishing industry. Let's face it, I mean, choosing a book to publish is subjective. The publishing house has to find a book that buyers want, that readers will enjoy, that they will share word of mouth. That is their goal, to share messages and share stories. So how important then is it to have diverse members of that staff, shall we say, having input on those decisions so that we can have those diverse messages, recognize what messages are ready to go out there into the world. And that then leads us into a bit of a topsy-turvy situation in the industry. I think many of us who have been involved in any part of the book world, whether as authors or in other arenas, know that in the last 10 years, many many changes have occurred, not the least of which is print on demand and independent publishing and independent authors giving more and more writers the opportunity to share their message out with the world. That is just fantastic. So we do have some significant inroads into creating more diversity and messages in the publishing world. Now that takes us into tier 3. The message is ready, the book has been created. How do we get it dispersed? How do we get it to the attention of the readers? How is that book going to be found? And in online stores, that's search terms. But what about those bookstores that everyone just desires to be in, to be on that bookshelf? Well, now we have distributors and retailers that have to step up. They have to bring those diverse messages to the front of the shelf, so to speak, not in a little niche in the corner, but out there in the genre, in the mainline book line, if you will. So when we combine those 3 things, the author, the provider of the information, the publisher, and then the whatever avenue it is that's going to disperse the books, then we can have a truly diverse range, I guess I would say, using that word again, of messages out there in the world. That, I think, is a very significant thing when all those act in concert, that we can see new messages.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. Great to have your viewpoint as well. I think this makes this whole event really diverse, really different points of view on the same subject. Next step, I think we're ready for the Q&A session.
I'm coming back.
Yes, I leave you the stage.
Thank you so much, Lee, it has been an absolute pleasure working with you on that book. I have to say, every step of the way, working with you and Right Way Publishing has been just a dream. So thank you so much. And also, Carl, I also really enjoyed your insights and about slowing down, and actually sometimes slowing down can help you move forward better. So I love that. I know Matthew is just looking at the question, he's just monitoring the question, and we are going to do a Q&A in just 1 second. Whilst you all finish typing your questions in the chat box, I just wanted to circle back quickly with Cheryl, because I know we run out of time with you, Cheryl, somehow. We just started really quickly. And before we jump back into the Q&A, Cheryl, would you be able to expand a bit more? You talked about your definition of inclusion, diversity. What I was curious to ask you, what is inclusion, why is it important in the workplace in terms of why does it matter? I think I wanted to hear your thoughts here as well.
Yeah, of course. So I'll start by saying why inclusion is personal to me. And for me, at a base level, it's, as you rightly said earlier, it's about feeling that I'm included in decisions, ways of working and initiatives that will impact how I feel and perform. It's about knowing that I'm being judged, not judged, I should say, and in making sure that I don't judge others. It's a feeling that I'm being, as you said, listened to and respected. And I think this is driven in the workplace, and it resonates with me that it's been driven by leaders, inclusive leaders. And I think I can name numerous leaders who I've worked with who some have been good, some have been bad, but I know the good ones and those that have been inclusive are those that have made me want to perform above and beyond my, what I would normally do. And they've had behaviors such as their willingness to listen, they embrace diversity, they create an environment where there's a sense of togetherness, they allow everyone to contribute, they give everyone a voice, they make others feel appreciated, and they show a lot of empathy and emotional intelligence that allows everybody to show up as the person they truly are, which I think is really, really valuable. They also provide a really supportive environment where people feel that it's safe to fail and to seek advice as well. They let people learn and grow. And I think, so when we're talking about inclusion, especially in the workplace, it is driven by inclusive leadership and leaders. And I also think that those leaders should demonstrate an awareness of their own mood, be able to be open and honest about mistakes, even if they've made them, be ethical. I think that's really, really important, and be able to manage their own emotions, because you can get leaders that dictate the mood of a business or their team by their emotions, and that makes people close down, which I think, as you know, can be not a good thing. So for me, inclusion is about, as you said earlier, about being invited and supported and able to be my true self in any given situation. And then why is it so important? We don't know that it's the ethical thing to do. We also know that a more inclusive an organization, the more innovative it is, the more collaborative it is, the more productive, the less likely an organization is to make embarrassing mistakes, for example, which can be costly. You're less likely to lose staff. What a lot of organizations don't realize is that it's more expensive to keep hiring than it is to retain good staff. You want to create a business where it's got a great culture and people feel really proud about that and shout about it to the rest of the world, so that you actually attract more talent. So if you get inclusion right in the workplace, hopefully those good practices for me slip into society and the communities we serve, reducing a lot of biases and the inequalities that exist.
Wow, so many great points, Cheryl. I was nodding at everything you said, because that's true. I love how you said permission to fail, giving people permission to fail, and you talked about psychological safety, and I can certainly relate to that, and that's really powerful. Thank you. I think we have quite a few questions now. So Matthew, did you identify one question you wanted to start with the Q&A?
Yes, we have lady called Anna Maria Uluba, and she's asking you not one question, but two questions. The first is, they're related. The first one is, whose responsibility is to adopt inclusion in an organization, and how much is the managerial structure duty to make sure it's implemented?
Great question. I'm happy to give you my take, and of course, then I'd love to ask the other panelists as well on their take on that. The question of who, for me, is it goes back to, you know, when I talked about change starts with you, and I know it's probably not the answer that kind of the quick and easy answer that people would like to hear, but I genuinely believe that change starts with you, meaning that regardless of your seniority level of the organization, regardless of your job title, and regardless of the department, I think, you know, you need to be an advocate for diversity and inclusion. Doesn't mean you have to do everything by yourself, and of course you can ask for support to your HR team and the leadership team and your manager and so on. But if you take accountability and you don't make excuses and you start learning, I think change starts with you. So I'm not sure that's the answer people were waiting, but that's my take. What was the other part of the question again? The structure?
Yeah, if it's how much is the managerial structure duty to make sure it's implemented?
Yeah, I'd like to think that an ethical organization would prioritize diversity and inclusion as part of their corporate social responsibility. But the structure can start. I think it's important that at some point there is some top level commitment from whether it's a CEO, the managing director, or someone who is leading the organization. So at some point there needs to be some commitment from the top. And then smaller organizations, they might assign their HR department to drive this, obviously in association with the leadership team. Or if it's a larger enterprise organization, they might have a dedicated diversity and inclusion department. So the structure will really depend on the size of the organization, but I think it's important to have the top leadership commitment at some point. And by the way, I'd like to open the same question to the rest of our panelists here. Maybe, yes, Carl.
I just wanted to add an extra element there. What you've underlined is uber important, right? The people at the top, especially setting the right tone. But I think it's equally essential to have some kind of metrics that you can judge your progress against, and whether that's in terms of how many people you're hiring or whatever it is. Just having some kind of benchmark that people can point to every 6 months and say, look, this is how far we've gone, this is how far we've got to go. So I think that goes hand in hand with people at the top, people in key positions owning inclusion and modeling it and setting the right tone. So I think you need kind of the two things to go along hand in hand.
Yeah, love this. Marion? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I totally agree with what both of you are saying. I think it's a win-win situation for companies to practice inclusion. And I agree with what Carl's saying, because you do need metrics to be able to demonstrate it. And I think it's probably going forward, we're going to need to look at what those metrics are. With menopause, it's easy because we can measure the symptom scores, and we can also measure lost productivity or even self-assessed lost productivity in the beginning. We've done it before. I did a study years ago in Kimberly-Clark in the workplace on PMS, where we measured productivity and symptoms before and after the intervention, and it was such a huge success. And I think that the ONS says it costs £30,000 per lost manager to replace a manager. And I think that if we're looking at retaining talent and retaining the workforce in general, then it's going to have a big impact on the economy, on the bottom line. And I think that's the way forward, to actually encourage senior management to see that this is a wise thing to do.
I like your take on it, Marion. Say there is a direct business case and there is direct impacts the bottom line. We can show you how much it costs. That's great. And Cheryl, before we move on to the next question, what's your take on that?
I absolutely agree with what Marion just said there in terms of the cost of retention. And there's a way of measuring that also. It's about, you can also measure happiness within an organization and well-being. And if people are walking out the door, that absolutely tells you that they're not happy, or they don't feel as though they are feel included within that organization. So that's something organizations really need to pay attention to, and they don't. There's very few that do exit surveys, so they don't know why it is that, you know, suddenly a whole swathe of people have just left the business. And I think they need to pay more attention to that. And I also want to circle back to the first question about whose responsibility is to be inclusive. And like you said, it's everybody's responsibility. And another way of thinking of it is, how do you want to be treated in that organization? And if you don't feel that you're being treated right, then are you exhibiting the same sort of behaviors onto someone else? And if you are, then obviously you're not making them feel inclusive as well. So, yeah.
I like that very simple way to ask yourself, how would you like to be treated, and how do you like to treat others? That's a great one. And Lee, before we move on to the next question, do you have any specific take on this question about who should be driving diversity and inclusion efforts?
I think, as been said, it really is the responsibility of all of us to live the message. If we don't do it individually, how can we do it as a group? So I think it really does have to start with each one of us. That does not mean senior leadership does not need to take a facing role. However, there has to be some guidance, some hand on the wheel, so to speak.
Absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. Thank you. Matteo, do we have a next question?
Yes, we have a question from Dirk Peters. This is directed to Carl in particular. I think he's asking for practical advice, if I can paraphrase. He's asking, so what is the best way to take into account the different tempos in our lives as leaders? Is there different ways or tricks to set up meetings, presentation, appraisals? And he finishes by saying, secondly, do you see maybe opportunities to make use of these different tempos?
Gosh, I could deliver a whole thesis on that. Where would we start? I mean, you mentioned meetings. I mean, one trick that I've seen work really well, it's something they do at Amazon and other companies have followed suit, is that they kick off every meeting with a kind of slow moment or a period of silence when the people in the meeting, this is at the top level of Amazon, where they kind of crunch their numbers and read over reports and just arrange their arguments. And then when the meeting starts, it's focused and streamlined, and it's actually more efficient, right? The meeting ends up being faster and you get more done more quickly. That delicious paradox of slow, that you have the injection of slowness at the beginning, you slow down the tempo at the start, and then things can move more smoothly and more swiftly afterwards. So that's one example in the meeting environment. I think just as a general principle, whenever I'm working with companies and so on, my suggestion is always not to go in whole hog, suddenly to try and change everything tomorrow. I mean, this is one of the ironies of our fast forward culture, is that we're in such a hurry all the time that we even want to slow down fast, right? So company, like a leader will hear the idea of slow and say, yeah, we need that now. And suddenly everybody's got to meditate this morning, and then they're running off to do yoga, which of course doesn't really work. You've got to slow down slowly, and you also have to do it in baby steps. And I always suggest running little pilot projects for the whole company or department, or maybe just a small team. So you say, maybe this week, everyone will leave the office when their work is done instead of hanging around putting in FaceTime, or everyone will have 3 hours in the evening when they don't look at email, whatever it is. And then just run that project for the week. And at the end of the week, come together around the table and say, what did that feel like? How did that affect our output? How did that affect the way we felt? How did that affect our home lives? Could we keep it, change it, modify it, and so on? So I think it's also a way of just sort of playing around and finding the right formula, the right recipe, because there's no universal recipe for slowing down for individuals or for companies in general. You really have to slowly work out what the right blend is for you.
I love the idea of slowing down fast. I think it really resonates.
Many
with
people
me.
do like that idea.
I've seen that at a lot of organizations.
But it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. I think we might have time for one last question before wrapping up. And also we have to choose the winner, of course, of the free book. So what's the last question, Matteo?
Yes, this is from Adebayo, who asked the question earlier. She's asking, so with most companies now that the pandemic is receding in certain parts of the world, that they're trying to get back to full operations. So how do we ensure that diversity and inclusion is kept as part of their top priorities now that the focus is on going back into business?
That's such a great question. I think, by the way, it's a he, not a she. I think. So I'm happy to answer it, and then of course I'd love to go around the virtual room. And the question was around.
See, how do they keep the focus on diversity now that they're reopening?
Yeah, I think for me it's always good at articulating the business case, and I think sadly I'd like to think that we don't have to do this, but sadly we have to go back to what's the business case, why are we doing this from a business perspective. And if we can articulate the business case, we talked about retaining talent, attracting talent, nurturing top talent, the business loss of losing talent and replacing talent, that's very expensive for the business, very disruptive. So I think in my experience, the more we can articulate the business case of why should we invest in diversity and inclusion, I think the more companies are going to stick to it and make it part of a strategic priority, as opposed to a nice to have that gets deprioritized every time there is a recession or a pandemic. So that's my take on it. But again, I'd love to go around the room and ask our panelists what their take on it. And maybe we can follow the same order. Marion, would you like to share your take on that?
Yeah, I just think that I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that having metrics, as Carl said earlier, is going to be a really important thing going forward, because money speaks, sadly. And I think that there are so many factors. Going back to work is going to be a challenge for lots of people on so many levels. And I think this is just one of them. Hopefully, when people are seeing each other face to face, there will be more inclusion. I think it is easier to be inclusive when you're together rather than on Zoom. And let's just hope that's the way the world goes. But I think in the back room, we need to be looking at, well, what are the metrics and how do we prove this economic model? Because once you've done that, it will be a whole lot easier.
Thanks, Marion. So focusing on the economic model. Thank you. Cheryl, what's your take on that?
So for me, D&I is actually going to be even more important when we go back into what the old normal, I should say, for several reasons. One, you're going to have this hybrid model working. You're going to have people who are remote. You're going to have people in the office. So how do you make sure that everyone feels part of a team and included when everyone's somewhere else? So that's going to be a real focus. Then there's going to be the mental health aspect of it all. People have gotten used to working in their own little bubble for so long. How do you manage mental well-being in that scenario, especially again when you've got people, some in the office, some not? And for me also, the pandemic has proved that we can work very differently and also open up our businesses to different people, especially maybe those with disabilities. So there should be more of a focus on D&I now, because it's proven that you can be anywhere, work anywhere, and have any kind of ability to do several jobs now. So why not invite those people into the business?
Yeah, and I can certainly relate to what you said about everybody's been used to working in their bubble, but maybe we shouldn't go back to normal. We should actually this time around prioritize diversity and inclusion. I think it's a really good point. Thanks, Cheryl. And Carl, what's your take on how do we keep inclusion and diversity top priority for businesses?
Well, that was just sort of what I was going to say, is that in a sense, maybe I'll sound a little bell of optimism here, which is that the pandemic has been a total nightmare. We all know that, but it's also a moment of, I think, reset, right? Where all the pieces on the puzzle have been thrown in the air and they're coming down now. So this is a moment to reinvent and to reboot and come back with something newer and better. And as just the argument just made a second ago, I agree completely. What this shows is that people don't have to fit into the traditional work model of going to the office 5 days. You know, that opens up the whole world to employment, to recruitment, and so on. And so I hope that companies, and I expect many will now, come out of this panic into this new world and think, well, actually, it's wide now. It's not narrow. It's open. It's not closed. So that would be the spirit I both hope and expect that we'll come out of this with. I think for a lot of companies, smart companies will embrace that.
Yeah, I like how you say it's an opportunity to reset instead of going back to where we were. So I love that. And finally, Lee, what is your take on how do we get organizations to prioritizing diversity and inclusion in the long run?
Just using publishing and retail sales as a clear example. When we have diverse messages out there, we immediately increase audience. We widen the audience. We add new people, whatever we want to call it. And when we do that, we right away add right to the bottom line for the authors, for the publishers, for the retailers, and that cycles back around so that the writers can give us more information, more stories, share more experiences with us. And how strong is that? It is a self-perpetuating, wonderful, wonderful circle.
Absolutely. And I really fully agree with what you said around publishing is a very strong tool to really support more diverse voices. So I agree with that. I think with that, we're just gonna move on to picking the winner of the book of the prize. Matteo, have you got a name for us?
Yes, I think we have one.
Come and share with us.
So, I think okay. Pause, drama. I think the winner is Adebayo Onafuwa.
Congratulations, Ade.
We have your details, and we'll be in touch after this. And now I want to sort of hand it over again to Perrine for some final remarks.
Thank you so much, Matteo. So Ade, congratulations. I will reach out to you after this webinar. I'll get your email address. I'll find your address and send you a signed copy. And I really wanted to thank each and one of you for being here today. Of course, our panelists for your very, very valuable time and insights. I think each and one of our panelists truly have a very unique perspective on this topic. And I feel very lucky to have each of you here. And thank you for being here. Marion, Cheryl, Carl, and Lee, really appreciate it. Matteo, thank you for being such a fantastic host as well. And I volunteered. The story behind this is that I volunteered my husband Matteo to be our host today. So I didn't give him much choice, but he did a wonderful job.
I canceled all my meetings.
Bravo.
Thank you, Matteo. And of course, our attendees, I know your time is very, very valuable. I know you're all very busy people. And so I really appreciate your time here. It means a lot to me personally that you came here to celebrate my book launch today. Thank you. Of course, I think, as you know, my book is available on Amazon.co.uk, .com, .fr, I think pretty much in every country. So feel free to grab your copy. And with that, I think Matteo had some closing remarks for us before we moved on.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you, Perrine. Thank you to all the panelists and all the people that attended today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.